Okay, so just a quick little review for naming compounds. We'll start with just our covalent. So remember, covalent compounds are where we have a nonmetal and a nonmetal. So anytime you're given a compound, the first thing you want to do is look and see, okay, is my first element a nonmetal? And if it is, then you know you have covalent, so you know you're going to use prefixes. Okay, so if we look at our first example here, sulfur dihydride, if I want to write the formula, I'm just going to write the symbols for the names. So sulfur is an S, and then I have dihydride. Hydride sounds like hydrogen, right? So I know that there's going to be an H, and then my prefixes are going to tell me how many I have. So remember, if there's no prefix on the first element, that means there's just one. So when we have mono, the prefix for one, we only use it on the second element. Okay, we never use it on the first one. So if I don't see a prefix, I know that means I just have one, so I'm just gonna leave it as an S. And then to show that I have two hydrogens, I'm gonna put a 2 right after the hydrogen. So this is sulfur dihydride. Okay, if I wanna write out the name, I just have to remember what my prefixes are. So again, I can just always start by naming. So this is nitrogen, and then I have oxygen. Remember, we always change the ending to "ide." So I'm just gonna put nitrogen oxide. But then remember, this is covalent, so I have to have prefixes. So I'm gonna go back and put in my prefixes. So for 2, it's di, so dinitrogen. And then here, right, we have an invisible one. So this is really going to be monoxide, okay, monoxide. So if I want to erase it and kind of make it look a little bit nicer, nitrogen monoxide. Okay, so our prefix mono, we put in front of the oxygen. So if I look at the next example, this is sulfur, but there's 2 of them, so we're going to say disulfur. And then we have fluorine, but remember, we always change it to ide, fluoride. And since we have 5, that is penta. Okay, so you do have to remember the prefixes. You should have written these down in your notes. If you didn't, just a quick Google can probably tell you what they are, but you do need to know them so that you can name them in the formulas. Okay. Now just a quick ionic review. So remember, for ionic, that's when we're looking at a metal. So all we have to do is look at the first element, and if we see that it's a metal, then we know that this is ionic. So remember, let me flip over here to the periodic table. Remember, most of our elements are metals. So we have this little stair step here that kind of separates out. So we have all metals over here, and then over here we have our non-metals. Okay, so anything under the staircase, we can refer to it as a metal. So if I look and I see that the first element falls somewhere in one of these, I know that I have an ionic compound. Okay, so sodium is a metal, so I know this is ionic. So when I name it, for our ionics, it's a little bit easier. We have no prefixes for ionics. Okay, so no prefixes. So all I'm going to do is just write the name. This is sodium chloride, right? Because we always change the ending to ide. So instead of chlorine, we say chloride. For this one, Li is lithium. Okay, and then here, in this case, we have what we call our polyatomic. So how do I know that this is a polyatomic? Because it's 2 different things. I have sulfur and I have oxygen. I cannot say lithium sulfur oxide, okay? We can't have 3 names. We can only have 2 names. So because I only had 2 things here, right? We have our sodium chloride. Here we have lithium. And then my second thing is this polyatomic. So this is when we're going to look at our purple sheet. Okay, and I have an example of one here. And then we're just gonna look here at our polyatomic list. So here is my SO4 that I have written down, and that is called sulfate. So I'm just gonna come back to my list, whoops, and I'm gonna say lithium sulfate. And again, that's all I have to do. I just have to write the name. There are no prefixes, okay? A little bit trickier is sometimes writing the formula, right? Because we have to use what we call the crisscross method. So that's when we're gonna take those charges, so whatever the charge is up there, okay, maybe I should just use question marks, and we're just gonna crisscross them down below. Okay, so let's look at our first example here, strontium fluoride. So I know that strontium is Sr, and I know that fluoride is really just fluorine, so I need to look and see if I can find their charges. So I'm gonna look over here at my periodic table. Remember, this is on the back of your periodic table. Here is strontium, and then here is fluorine. So I have a 2 plus and a 1 minus. So I'm gonna go back to my notes. This is 2 plus, 1 minus, and then I'm just gonna crisscross my numbers down. So I have an invisible 1, and then we have a 2. And again, you don't really need the 1. Typically we don't write that, but if it helps you to write it at the beginning, just so you can kind of see what you're doing, that's fine. Okay, when we get here for our second example, we have copper 2 bromide. So remember, what does this Roman numeral here mean, right? Remember, this is actually telling me the charge. So if I look at my periodic table and we look at copper, which is right here, copper can either have a 2 plus charge or a 1 plus charge. Remember, these are called our transition metals. So because it can have either charge, I have to use that Roman numeral to tell me which charge to use. So because it's a Roman numeral 2, that's telling me I'm going to use that 2 plus. And then my other element was bromine, which is right here. So it has a 1 minus. So when I go back, right, I know it's copper. And remember, this 2 is telling me it's a 2 plus. And then bromine has a 1 minus. So again, when we crisscross, that copper with the invisible 1 is going to come down, and then the 2 is going to crisscross down in front of bromine. And then remember, we can erase that 1 because we don't really need it. And then that's our final answer, copper 2 bromide. Okay, let's look at example number 3. This is potassium nitrate. So potassium, I know, is a K. And then nitrate, this is different, right? It doesn't end in "ide." So because I see this 8, that is telling me that it is a polyatomic, just like my sulfate was up at the top. Okay, so first, let's look at potassium, and then we're going to look at nitrate, because I do still need my charge for potassium. So here's potassium. It has a 1 plus charge. So I'm going to go back and write that down, 1 plus. And then now I need to find nitrate. So I'm going to go to my polyatomic list, and I'm going to try to find nitrate. So here it is, nitrate. So what is my formula? My formula is NO3, and it has this 1 minus charge. Okay, that's what that little minus is right here. It's really telling you it's a -1 charge. So I'm going to go write that down, NO3, 1 minus. And again, we're just going to crisscross, just like we did the last time. Since they're all 1s, remember 1s are invisible, so we just have to write KNO3, potassium nitrate. Okay, for our last example, we have aluminum nitride. So again, we're back at our periodic table. This is nothing fancy. So we have Al, and then we have our nitrogen. So I need to go look and find my charges. So let me just erase some of this so it's not confusing. So here's aluminum. Okay, it has a 3 plus, and then here is nitrogen. It has a 3 minus. So when I write those down, 3 plus, 3 minus. Okay, so when we crisscross, it looks like we should write it like this, 3 and 3. Okay, this is not wrong, but because this is an ionic compound, we usually write them in simplest format. So it would be like your math teacher taking 3 over 3, right? Your math teacher is going to tell you that that's the same thing as 1 over 1. So instead of writing AL3 in 3, we're just going to write AL1 in 1. Okay, remember those 1s are invisible. Okay, so that's just a quick little review. If this is still confusing to you, then I suggest going back and watching the videos from before spring break that will go through a lot more examples. And then you can always come in for refuel for additional help.